And the number one problem that is responsible for all of this is the corruption of our politics by big money, corporate money that is being used to divide us and fund campaigns, pit us against each other. That is what is creating the economic reality that is so challenging for so many people. And by the way, that is not an urban-rural split.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Duke's Download. Today, I am so honored and thrilled to have Zach Wahls, Iowa State Senator, LGBTQ plus advocate, author, and Democratic candidate for U.S. Senate. Zach first captured hearts, which I remember very well, nationwide in 2011 with his viral speech to the Iowa legislature defending marriage equality and his family with two moms. I met him in the early 2010s while we were both doing advocacy work following that powerful moment. And today, as a sixth-generation Iowan, Eagle Scout, new dad, and problem solver in the state Senate, Zach is bringing fresh energy to politics. We'll chat about his journey, the current political landscape, Midwest lessons, and more. Zach, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, Duke, it's great to see you again. It's been far too long. I just the other day, we celebrated, I kind of can't believe this is true, the 15th anniversary of that 2011 testimony. I kind of can't believe it's now old enough to drive, but here we are.
It's unbelievable. And I think we met, if I remember correctly, it was I don't remember exactly what it was, but I know it was a conference in Florida, and it was, I guess, 2011. But I remember meeting you and, of course, knowing who you were because of your speech, which, was kind of one of the first, it was among the first, speeches you could say that went viral. It was like you, Barack Obama at the DNC in 2004. But it was it was one of those speeches that kind of transcended, it really made an impact, not just in America, but around the world. It was a pretty important.
Yeah, it was definitely, it was definitely very transformative in my own life, and I think had an impact that at the time I don't think I even really fully had an appreciation for. And it's been kind of wild now since we launched the U.S. Senate campaign back in June of last year, just hearing from people across our state, across the country, who remember that speech, remember, seeing me back when I was 19 years old and thought to themselves, man, I really hope that guy runs for office someday. It's like, I got great news for you,
Yeah, I mean, look, you were 19. I mean, for those of you watching who haven't seen the speech, you should go on YouTube. It was an incredible moment. You were speaking in front of the House Judiciary Committee in the Iowa legislature, talking about marriage equality because you had two moms. And I mean, looking back 15 years later, after that moment, was it sort of a conscious decision to go into advocacy and politics, or because of the way that speech sort of just took off, was it sort of just like a involuntary thing where you just got sort of swept up in this moment?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the video itself going viral was very involuntary. I gave that speech on a Monday night, and by Wednesday, 48 hours later, it had been uploaded to YouTube and was ricocheting across blogs and social media and all of those things, and really turned my life totally upside down. And, the initial reaction was I was just totally overwhelmed by what was going on, because I had never done anything like this before. I had never really been a public advocate before or anything of that nature. And so I was very fortunate to have a lot of people who helped me navigate through that and kind of find those opportunities where I was able to continue kind of speaking up and sharing my story. And it was very much a conscious decision. I kind of had this choice to make, right? Do I go back to my life as an engineering student? I was studying civil and environmental engineering. I was going to go build literal bridges, not metaphorical political bridges. But the support that I got from my community and from a lot of incredible people who I met along the way gave me the opportunity to go be an effective advocate. And that's certainly been, in hindsight, something that I am very glad that I made the decision that I did. We've been able to do a lot of great things, whether that was defending marriage equality in Iowa and helping support the expansion of marriage equality across the country. The work that I helped lead as a co-founder and executive director of Scouts for Equality, which is a national campaign to end anti-LGBT discrimination in the Boy Scouts of America. And then taking those lessons that I learned about being a winning advocate with me to the Iowa State Senate when I ran back in 2018. I was the youngest member of the Iowa State Senate when I was elected. I was 27 years old. 7 years later, I am still the youngest member of the Iowa State Senate at the age of 34.
Wow.
And when we win this campaign in November, I will be the youngest member of the U.S. Senate as well.
That's incredible. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, and the fact that you're still the youngest member, and it's been what? I mean, that's what
7 years,
now.
7 long years.
I mean, I know Iowa's always been so interesting to me because, I don't think, I mean, a lot of people may not know this, but it was basically it was the second state, right, to legalize marriage equality nationwide.
Technically, we were the third, I believe, and I'm going to get the order wrong, but it was like
I think maybe it was
Massachusetts was first, and like maybe Vermont, and then California had it, but then
Right.
Proposition 8 passed in 2008, and then Iowa was in April of 2009. So we were like the third state for the second time or something, or second. Yeah, anyway.
No, I mean, you're right. It was weird because California legalized it 2008 and banned it. Then Iowa legalized in 2009. So, and then California didn't legalize it again so I mean, it was a weird, patchwork there. But I was considering that Iowa, and, obviously not just LGBT rights, but Iowa basically going back to the beginning has always been sort of a leader in terms of civil rights. And, but, in terms of both your advocacy, but also since you've started serving in the state Senate, what changes have you seen? And also, I guess the question is like, what challenges remain in Iowa and nationally? It's one of those things where I guess like anywhere else around the country, there's progress and then there's some, it's always 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I feel like is the story of America as a whole and Iowa.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, what I would say is that Iowa does have a long and proud tradition of being a leader on civil rights. That goes back to the Constitution that were written by our state's founders, which was a very forward-looking, very egalitarian Constitution when it was written at the time. And I think it's a reflection of, most of the politics of the people who were a part of the creation of our state. In the last, I'd say probably 45 years or so, going back to when Iowa was hit very, very hard by the farm crisis in our state. Iowa has had a very kind of, I would say, anti-establishment mood politically. We're a state that has, at the presidential level, certainly, generally supported candidates who were willing to speak truth to power to the establishment, whether that was supporting, that fresh-faced young man from Arkansas, Bill Clinton, back in the 90s, Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012, or Donald Trump in 2016, 2020, and 2024. They were all candidates who ran on a change message, challenging the establishment in D.C., shaking things up. And that's certainly, very consistent with my own approach to the advocacy work that I did, finding the courage to step up and speak in defense of my family, which I think a lot of Iowans respect, even if at the time they may not have had all of their questions about marriage equality answered. But thankfully, we were able to do that as a part of what happened after I gave that speech. And then, in my time in the state Senate, I've been able to both work with Republicans when those opportunities are there, which are not as frequent as I would like, but they are there from time to time. I've been a very effective legislator in that regard. I've also been willing to challenge my own party when there are people who have been wanting to take us down a direction that I thought was wrong for our state. And I've never shied away from criticizing national party leaders, when they've wanted to do things that I don't think are good for my state or for my constituents. And so I think, that independence is something that has been really resonating with a lot of people in this campaign. The courage of your convictions is something that Iowans really value. And I think it's part of why we've had so much success so far.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a political junkie anyway, but I've been following the Iowa Senate race. And I mean, by pretty much every metric. I mean, I know in terms of, raising money, in terms of the polls. I mean, it seems like I know you have 2 other candidates in the race, but it seems like you're pretty much, not to jinx it, but it seems like at least at this point, you're the front runner by most standards and metrics.
Yeah, I mean, that's what Time Magazine said last week, and a number of other kind of outside observers have said. And what I would say is, we certainly do have a Democratic primary at this point, but I think the fundamental question that everyone is trying to answer is how do we nominate a candidate who's building a campaign that's strong enough to win in November, because the stakes are incredibly high. I mean, you look at what's happening right now across our state, across our entire country. And it is just absolutely vital that we bring some change to the U.S. Senate, because I don't think that anyone, frankly, Democrat or Republican, feels good about the current trajectory that we're on. And our message from the very beginning of this campaign has been that we need to build a new coalition that includes Iowans who may not agree on every single issue, but who share our belief that we can build an economy that works for us, that we get these costs under control. We break up some of these monopolies that have been jacking up the cost of everything, whether it's groceries, healthcare, nursing homes, childcare. I mean, my wife and I have one kid, and our childcare costs more than our mortgage. I mean, this system is fundamentally broken. And the thing that I think not enough Democrats talk about is the fact that what is happening in the economy is directly linked to the corruption of our politics because of things like Citizens United and this massive outside spending. Elon Musk spending $100 million in 2024 is absolutely unbelievable. And we have to call out that corruption. It is something that is resonating with people across the political spectrum. In fact, last month, I introduced at the state level a constitutional amendment that would essentially be the state equivalent of overturning Citizens United. And I was able to introduce that proposal in a bipartisan way with a Republican colleague, because that is something that is not a left versus right issue. That is a right versus wrong issue.
No, I think it seems like the common themes there, in terms of, in a way, it's sort of the same reasons why Trump perhaps won in 2024, the very reasons why now there seems to be a backlash against a lot of what's going on in Washington.
Yeah.
And I know this applies not just to the Senate race, but I know that in the governor's race, it seems like that this may be the year for the first time in who's the last Democratic senator from Iowa? Tom Harkin?
So we had Tom Harkin, who retired in 2014, and then we had Democratic Governor
right?
Chet Culver back in 2010. But the thing that's really exciting to me, this is the first time since 1968 that we have had both an open governor's race and an open Senate race on the ballot at the same time. And that's something that, again, it's been almost 60 years basically since that happened. And so this is a really unique opportunity for the people of Iowa to chart a new direction for the future of our state.
I know that this is sort of referring to, the Midwest sort of as a homogenous, region. Obviously, each state has its own specific issues and challenges and debates. But, what would you say? I know you've already kind of touched on this, but what would you say are the biggest issues the biggest issues that you're focusing on in terms of when hopefully you're elected to the Senate? Yeah. What are the main issues that you're going to be focusing on in Washington? What issues do you think could draw bipartisan support?
This is a great question.
So I'd say certain issues intransigent, but I think there are certain issues that you could probably build some real consensus on.
Yeah, 100%. So, again, number one issue that we're facing in the state, and this is true, I think, in a lot of places, is the economy. The fact that costs did go up during the Biden administration, and Trump, I think, won in 2024 by being focused on lowering costs. But they have passed policies that Donald Trump has proposed that Ashley Hinson, my Republican opponent, has been a consistent vote for that have actually jacked prices up even higher, whether that's things like the tariffs that have increased costs for, everyday Iowans, for small businesses, for farmers. And I know there's been a lot of attention on the effect of reciprocal tariffs on export markets, which are a huge, part of Iowa's ag economy. But it's also the input costs. Things like seed, fertilizer, potash, fertilizer, pesticide, fungicide. If your grain wagon or your tractor or your combine breaks down and you need a new part for your implement, the costs for those have gone through the roof over the last 12 months as a result of these tariff policies. Then on the other side, you look at all of the impacts from the cuts, $1 trillion of cuts to Medicaid, to food assistance, both of which are absolutely vital in rural America and especially in rural Iowa. And Joni Ernst voted for those things. And she's been just so, focused on these really divisive culture war issues. She's co-sponsored a total abortion ban in the U.S. House of Representatives. The vast majority of Iowans are pro-choice and do not support that kind of approach. And then on the other side, she's voted to cut Social Security. She's voted to raise the retirement age for Social Security. She voted against the bipartisan infrastructure law that would bring billions of dollars of new investment into our state, but then had the brass to show up at ribbon cuttings for projects that she voted against funding. I mean, it's almost beyond comprehension. And I would just tell you, you look at her record and you stack it up compared to mine. I think that we've got a very clear contrast to draw, and just our fundamental belief that a better politics is possible, that we can actually bring people together to solve these core issues in the economy, to clean up the corruption in DC. And I'll work with anybody, Democrat, Republican, or independent, to drain the swamp, if that's what we're still saying these days, because I just look at what's happening right now, and it simply can't go on the way it is.
No, I mean, I vividly remember seeing the news. Probably the main reason why she dropped out of the race, when Joni Ernst, I believe it was after the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill, and she was like, "Well, we all die. We all die anyway, so
we're all gonna die." Yeah.
I mean, that was just for a United States senator to say something like that is just. Yeah. It's mind-boggling. And then to your point, I mean, I know depending on what part of the country people are in, people have different opinions about this issue, but even on the whole issue with, ICE and the two of the members that were people that were, killed in Minnesota, the fact that that money that was supposed to be, given that money was supposed to be for healthcare and for Medicaid.
Yeah.
And it was taken away and diverted to these other priorities, when healthcare and Medicaid and these programs should really be these are programs that people literally that are about life and death. And so the fact that that Joni Ernst would say something like that is just mind-boggling. It's unbelievable.
Look, I'll tell you this, Duke. I mean, so one of the things that I've learned representing small town and rural Iowa for many years is how important it is for elected officials to listen to their constituents, not just show up and wait for their turn to talk, to actually hear what people are saying. And so we decided that we would actually go to Joni Ernst's hometown and talk with leaders at her hometown hospital in Montgomery County and hear directly from them about what these cuts to Medicaid would mean in their community and for their hospital. And what they told us was, and these are their words, Medicaid has been our salvation. And then they talked about the fact that, since those Medicaid payments came online, before then, 60% of Iowa hospitals were operating at an annual loss. I mean, they were in the red with an uncertain future. And then when Medicaid created, it's called directed payments that support rural hospitals, that number dropped from 60% down to 20%. So still have some work to do. But now with the cuts that Joni Ernst and Ashley Hinson, that they voted for, they are terrified that that number is going to go straight back to where it was, if not even higher, because of these growing costs that we continue to see. And that is the difference fundamentally, right? Where they are so concerned about basically repaying their donors who funded their campaign in 2024, that they're voting to cut, massive tax breaks for the ultra wealthy billionaires like Elon Musk, cutting $200 billion plus from food assistance, $800 billion plus from Medicaid. And then they're throwing, this $50 billion out there, like that's going to plug an $800 billion hole. I mean, it's frankly, it's insulting that they even propose that. So from my perspective, it is so clear to me that we need to reverse those cuts so we can actually support healthcare across the country, make it affordable, make it accessible. And that doesn't even include the cuts to the affordable care subsidies for plans like the one that my little sister is on. But that's a whole separate conversation, unfortunately.
No, there's a lot going on all at once. A lot of issues that need to be solved. One of the main questions I wanted to ask you, because I think you'd have a really interesting and informed insight about this. Obviously I live in California, and it's like there's often this perceived deep divide in American politics, red versus blue, urban versus rural. I have kind of an interesting perspective because I'm both a gay advocate, but I'm also the son of a guy who worked in the Reagan administration. And, so I've always had this kind of dual perspective about, I've never been someone that's like, even despite the fact I have very strong feelings, obviously, about LGBTQ rights, I've always had an understanding about what people of different, backgrounds and political philosophies have. And I guess my question for you is, given this perceived deep divide and polarization right now, why do you think that narrative persists, and how do you think leaders can bridge that divide? And especially in a swing state like Iowa, where really I would say, in the Midwest, where these sort of debates are more, I would say, more pronounced than perhaps anywhere else in America.
Yeah, so I would say a few things. First and foremost, the the reality is we have so much more in common than we do in difference. And that is something that when I look back 15 years ago to that speech and the way it resonated the way it did, it wasn't by talking about the things that made my family different. It was by talking about the things that made our family just like any other family. And I'm not saying that we should ever erase our differences or pretend to be, more homogenous than we are. But I think the vast majority of Americans hold a lot of the same views, a lot of the same beliefs, want the same things for our families, for our neighbors, for our communities. But we have, unfortunately, this political climate where it really incentivizes some of the most radical, positions, what have you, that get accentuated in part because that is what feeds the social media algorithms, that incentivize divisiveness and personal attacks and all of these things. It's the same thing that was true for media, whether it was newspapers or TV before social media, but I think social media has made it so much worse than it was before. And I think that there are some different, there are actually different interests, right, that do exist. I think the biggest, emergence of that divide that you kind of spoke to actually is kind of a rural urban split, right, where you've seen this growing gap between folks who live in more kind of densely populated areas versus people who live in more rural areas. But I'll tell you this, Duke, having represented small town and rural Iowa, having won votes from thousands of people who voted for Donald Trump in 2016 and then voted for me in 2018, the way that we do, the way that we win some of these folks back, it's not by running away from our values. It is not by throwing certain parts of our coalition under the bus. It is by finding that common ground, focusing on that common ground, and then talking specifically about what is causing the problems that we are facing in our state and in our country. And the number one problem that is responsible for all of this is the corruption of our politics by big money, corporate money that is being used to divide us and fund campaigns, pit us against each other. That is what is creating the economic reality that is so challenging for so many people. And by the way, that is not an urban-rural split. Life is unaffordable whether you live in a big city, a small town, a rural community, or on a dirt road. This is a state that is absolutely getting hammered by what is happening in D.C., and that is exactly why it's so important that we nominate and then elect somebody who's going to take that head on.
It's true. You're right. Affordability is just as big of a problem in California and New York as it is in Iowa. I mean, it is, but I mean, I always, there's so many theories about where that divide came from. Some people say it's more cultural. Some people say it's more about economics. I think maybe there's an element of truth to, nothing is black and white. There's lots of nuances and different reasons why these things exist. But I think to your point, probably social media and media in general are probably the main two reasons why they have an incentive to try to stoke polarization and division.
Yeah, so I've got a theory on this, and I don't have like a research paper to back it up, but I really do think that cable was a huge part of what happened. So, when we were growing up back in the 90s, before the real rise of cable TV, somebody who lived in a more urban community in Iowa had more in common culturally with somebody who lived in a more rural community in Iowa than, either of us would have had with somebody who grew up in, Arkansas, right, or Alabama. There are just real cultural differences there. But as cable came online, you're able to segment, right, your audiences a little bit, differently, have different programming aside from the broadcast model, right, that by definition has to appeal to people in different places. And then so cable TV allows for this kind of regionalization. And then this break between urban and rural, that kind of you start to create these like almost like brand identities around like a rural identity, so like Duck Dynasty, right? Good example of this. Even though, that's just like a very different, place from rural Iowa. And then those just kind of play out over time, right? And it kind of puts you onto this path dependency that kind of gets accentuated with algorithms and social media now. And so I think that there's a lot of reasons for that, but I think media technology is definitely a big part of it. But at the end of the day, what we have to do going forward is have people who can be comfortable speaking in those different audiences to people who have different ideas, who can find the common ground and bring people together. That's exactly what we're doing in this race. And if anyone wants to learn more, I should mention, obviously, you can learn a lot more information at zachwahls.com. And we've got tons of information about how to contribute to the campaign with your resources, how to volunteer with your time, how to help spread the word in your own network. It is a real grassroots campaign, and that's what it's going to take to win.
June 2nd is the primary. Is that right?
Yes, sir. 115 days. And yes, we are counting.
I can only imagine. I mean, I'm not to compare it at all, but I mean, even on my small level, I ran for city council in West Hollywood and, here in California, and running for office is not easy. That was actually going to be my final question for you was, on a personal level, I know obviously you have your wife, Chloe, you have a newborn son, Elijah. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
But what has it been like for you? Right? I mean, I know, again, you've served in an elected office for 8 years now, but running for the United States Senate on a personal level, I have so many questions, but just what is the experience like? How do you manage your personal life with your state Senate obligations, with your campaign responsibility? What has that whole process been like for you?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, we could fill a whole nother half hour on that topic. And, and I've always been a bit of a kind of a, productivity, junkie, I guess you could say. What I would say, the things that have been the most important, just having support from family. My wife, Chloe, is absolutely incredible. And babe, if you're listening, I love you so much. But what I would tell you is that she, and also the support of my parents, my sister, this campaign would not be possible without the incredible amount of childcare that my family has provided pro bono. And then, staying focused, staying disciplined. I was a big fan of this mantra from Kobe Bryant, just kind of constant improvement, constant curiosity, constantly getting better. Don't necessarily get too caught up on focusing on the results, the outcomes, focus on your process every day. You do that, you win the day, you win the week, you win the month, you win the year. And that's kind of just the approach that we bring to it. It's so easy, especially in politics, to get distracted by whatever the crisis of the day is. And of course, there are moments when you have to respond to that. You mentioned the shooting in Minnesota is a really good example. It's important to have leaders with the moral clarity to speak up when things like that are happening. But it is so important as a candidate to stay focused every single day on what is right in front of you and not to get too bogged down by what's happening around you.
Yeah, you got to stay focused. And I mean, I'm, as you know, such a fan. I'm so grateful to you for all your years of advocacy. You were, an incredible voice back then. You're a great voice, and both as an elected official, just as an advocate now. And I cannot wait to see you in the U.S. Senate. I'm so excited. And I wish you the best of luck. Everybody watching, please support Zach's campaign. And I'm going to be following very closely. And if there's anything I can do, I mean, just in terms of, I know I'm in California, but whether it's fundraising, I want to help in any way I can.
I'll give you a call. I'll give you a call soon. Don't you worry.
Sounds great. Thank you, Zach. Good luck. Congratulations.
Thanks, everybody.
Congratulations on your baby boy. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today on Duke's Download. This podcast is part of Pride House Media, hosted by me, Duke Mason, and produced and edited by Josh Rosenzweig. Original music composed by Nell Balaban. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And while you're there, leave us a rating and review. It really helps others to discover the show. I'd love to stay connected with you, so join the conversation by following me at James Duke Mason on Instagram and X, or by emailing me at questions@dukesdownload.com.